A son's thoughtful gift, a new water filter for his widowed mother. A sweet gesture, right? But what if your late husband appeared in your dreams, screaming a terrifying warning about that gift? This is the story of a nightmare I couldn't ignore, and the horrifying truth it forced me to uncover. Before you hear this chilling story, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and have the notification bell on. This is one you won't want to experience alone. It's been 2 years since I lost David, but the silence in our little house still hasn't learned to behave. It roars in the evenings and whispers in the mornings. Grief is a loud house guest. David was the love of my life, a man whose laughter could shake the pictures on the wall and whose presence made every corner of our home feel safe. Now, with him gone, I found myself drifting, a ghost in my own life, held afloat only by routines and the weekly visits from our son, Mark. Mark was a good son, or at least I told myself he was. After his father's death, he stepped up. He called every day, came over every Sunday with groceries, and always asked if I was taking my medications. He was handsome, successful, and attentive. This spitting image of his father, just without the easy laughter. Sometimes, when he'd stand in the kitchen, bathed in the afternoon light, his resemblance to a young David was so sharp it physically hurt to look at him. I saw it as a blessing, a living reminder of the man I'd lost. He came over last Tuesday, holding a sleek white box with a cheerful blue logo. "Got something for you, Mom," he said, placing it on the kitchen counter. It was a state-of-the-art water filtration system, the kind you attach directly to the faucet. I was reading about the municipal water quality reports for this area. It's not great, full of trace minerals, some industrial runoff. I don't want you drinking that stuff. This filters out 99.9% of everything. A wave of warmth washed over me, so potent it almost brought tears to my eyes. In a world where I felt so utterly alone, here was my son, my boy, worrying about the water I drank. It was such a thoughtful, practical, loving gesture. It was something David would have done. David was always tinkering, upgrading things around the house to keep me safe, to make my life easier. "Oh, Mark, you didn't have to," I said, my voice thick with emotion as I hugged him. He gave me a firm, slightly stiff pat on the back. "Of course I did, Mom. I just want you to be healthy," he said, his voice earnest. He spent the next 20 minutes installing it, his brow furrowed in concentration. He explained how to change the filter, showed me the little green light that indicated it was working, and made me promise I'd only drink water from the tap after it had passed through his gift. I promised. How could I not? I felt cherished, cared for. After he left, I poured myself a tall, clear glass of water from the new filter. It tasted crisp, clean, and pure. It tasted like love. That night, I went to bed with a rare feeling of peace, thinking that David would be so proud of the man our son had become. The dream started beautifully. I was in her old garden, the one we had planted together behind the house. The air was warm, smelling of David's prize-winning roses and freshly cut grass. He was there, standing by the bird bath, looking exactly as he did the summer before he got sick. Strong, healthy, his face crinkled into that familiar, loving smile. He held out his hand to me, and I felt a joy so pure and overwhelming it was like sunshine filling my veins. I walked towards him, my heart soaring. This was the gift grief sometimes gave you, a perfect, stolen moment with the one you'd lost. But as I got closer, the dream began to curdle. The vibrant colors of the roses leached away, turning a sickly, washed-out gray. A cold, unnatural wind whipped through the garden, tearing the petals from their stems. The sky above turned from a brilliant blue to a bruised, stormy purple. I looked at David, and the smile was gone from his face. It was replaced by a mask of raw, abject terror. His eyes were wide, pleading, and locked on something over my shoulder, back towards the house. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a strangled gasp came out. He looked frantic, desperate, pointing a trembling finger, not at me, but at the glass of water that had suddenly appeared in my hand. He tried again, his whole body shaking with the effort. This time a sound emerged. But it wasn't his voice. It was a guttural, terrifying roar that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the dream. It was a sound of pure warning. "Helen, for God's sake, don't drink the water." The force of his scream threw me backwards. I woke up with a violent jolt, sitting bolt upright in my bed, my own scream caught in my throat. My sheets were damp with cold sweat. It was just a dream, a horrible, vivid nightmare, but just a dream. I repeated it to myself over and over, but I couldn't shake the sound of David's voice or the primal terror in his eyes. It felt more real than the quiet darkness of my own bedroom. I stood there in the dead of night staring at the new filter gleaming on my faucet. Was it just a nightmare born of grief, or was it a warning from the only man I'd ever trusted? What I did next changed everything.
I didn't drink the water. I stood there in the cold, blue light of the moon filtering through my kitchen window, my hand hovering over the glass, my body paralyzed by the memory of a dream. It's grief, I told myself, my rational mind trying desperately to grab the reins. You're lonely. You miss him. Your mind is playing tricks on you, weaving your love for David and your love for Mark into some kind of gothic horror story. It was a plausible explanation. It was a sane explanation. But it didn't feel true. The terror from the dream was a living thing, coiled in the pit of my stomach. David's voice wasn't a memory. It was an echo still bouncing off the walls of my skull. I dumped the water into the sink, my hand shaking so much that the glass rattled against the stainless steel. I paced the linoleum floor, the one David and I had picked out together 30 years ago, its cheerful yellow pattern now looking faded and sad in the dim light. How could I even entertain such a monstrous thought? This was Mark, my son, the boy who brought me flowers on my birthday and always shoveled my driveway before I even had to ask. The man who had just shown me such a thoughtful gesture. To suspect him felt like a betrayal more profound than any nightmare. It felt like I was the one losing my mind. But the warning, don't drink the water, it was so specific, so urgent. By morning, I had wrestled my paranoia into a fragile truce. I decided I had to do something, not because I truly believed my son was trying to harm me, but to prove to myself that the dream was nonsense. I had to debunk the ghost of my own fear. I remembered I had an old comprehensive water testing kit in the garage, one David had bought years ago for his prized orchids because he was a fanatic about pH levels. It was a scientific, rational tool. It would give me a logical answer and put this madness to bed. I told myself it was just a silly experiment to see if Mark's fancy filter was worth the money. I took 2 clean jam jars and labeled them. One I filled with regular, unfiltered water directly from the tap. The other I filled from the new filter, the little green light glowing like a smug, synthetic eye. I laid out the testing strips, the chemical droppers, and the color chart, my movements slow and deliberate. It felt absurd, like I was the star of my own low-budget spy movie. Just as I was about to dip the first test strip, my phone rang, the cheerful ringtone I'd assigned to Mark sounding jarringly out of place in the tense silence. I answered, forcing a warmth into my voice that I didn't feel. "Morning, Mom," he said. "Sleep well?" The question sent a jolt of ice through my veins. "Like a log, sweetie," I lied, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "Good, good. Did you drink plenty of water? Staying hydrated is important," he added. His voice was smooth, caring, and solicitous, but now, filtered through the memory of my nightmare, his concerns sounded scripted, predatory. Every loving word was a potential threat. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Oh yes, the water from the new filter is just wonderful. Tastes so clean," I said, looking at the 2 jars of water sitting on my counter. The lie came easier than I expected. "That's great to hear, Mom. I'm glad it's working out. I'll see you Sunday, okay?" Of course, sweetie. I love you. Love you too, Mom. He hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, my breath shallow. I was now officially a liar. I was hiding something from my own son, all because of a dream. With a trembling hand, I picked up the first test strip and dipped it into the jar of regular, unfiltered water directly from the tap. I laid it on a paper towel and watched it change color, then compared it to the chart. Everything was normal. pH levels, chlorine, nitrates, all within the safe, expected range. My shoulders sagged with relief. See? It's all in your head, Helen. Then, I took the second strip and dipped it into the filtered water. The water Mark wanted me to drink. The water David had screamed about. I laid it down next to the first one. For a few seconds, it did nothing. Then a thin, dark line began to creep up the paper. It wasn't a color on the chart. It wasn't blue or green or yellow. It was a sickening, unnatural shade of grayish purple. It was a color that signified nothing, and in doing so, signified everything. It was the color of a secret. I stared at the two test strips lying side by side. One was normal, predictable. The other was a question mark, a stain of pure wrongness. My rational mind was screaming that it was a faulty test, but my late husband's voice was screaming something entirely else.
My first thought was that the test was a dud. Of course it was. David had bought that kit a decade ago. It was probably expired, the chemicals long since degraded into uselessness. That had to be it. With a surge of desperate hope, I fumbled through the box, found another foil-wrapped test strip, and repeated the process exactly. I dipped it into the glass of filtered water, laid it on the clean paper towel, and held my breath. The result was identical. A slow, creeping stain of that same sickening grayish purple. It was like watching a disease spread in real time. It wasn't a faulty test. It was a consistent, terrifying result that defied all logic. My carefully constructed wall of rationalization crumbled into dust. This wasn't in my head. The dream, the phone call with Mark, the two identical, unnerving test strips, they were all threads of the same horrifying tapestry. I spent the next hour hunched over my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard, typing in frantic combinations of words. Home water test turned purple. What chemical makes test strip gray? Substances not detected by standard water tests. I plunged into a rabbit hole of toxicology reports, environmental science forums, and chemistry articles I barely understood. I read about heavy metals, organic compounds, and tasteless, odorless chemicals that could slowly accumulate in the body over time, causing symptoms that mimicked old age, fatigue, confusion, weakness, aches and pains. A new, colder fear began to settle over me. For the past 6 months, I had been feeling more tired. My joints had been aching more than usual. I'd chalked it up to getting older, to the lingering physical toll of grief. My doctor had said the same thing. "You're not a spring chicken anymore, Helen," he'd said with a patronizing smile, patting my hand. Mark had been the one to express the most concern, shaking his head sadly and telling me how worried he was, how frail I seemed to be getting. Was it concern? Or was it observation? Was he monitoring his progress? The thought was so vile, so monstrous, it made me feel nauseous. A home testing kit wasn't going to cut it. I needed a real lab. I needed professionals to tell me exactly what was in this water. But I couldn't just walk into a local facility. This was a small town. What if the lab technician knew Mark? What if word got back to him that his crazy old mother was testing the water filter he'd so lovingly installed? I couldn't risk it. I had to be invisible. My plan was simple. I found a private environmental lab in a city 2 hours away. They offered anonymous sample testing for a hefty fee. I took a clean glass bottle, one I usually used for my homemade lemonade, and filled it directly from the filter, the green light glowing malevolently. I was screwing the cap on, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and resolve, when I heard a key in my front door.
I froze, my blood turning to ice. It was Mark. It wasn't Sunday. He never came over on a Thursday. "Mom," he called out, his voice echoing from the hallway. "Just thought I'd pop in. I was in the neighborhood and wanted to see how you were feeling." I shoved the bottle into the cabinet under the sink, my hands fumbling. I slammed the cabinet door just as he walked into the kitchen, a bright, artificial smile on his face. "Mark, what a surprise," I said, leaning against the counter to hide my trembling. "Just checking in on my favorite girl," he said, kissing my cheek. His eyes scanned the kitchen. "Everything okay? You look a little flushed." Just startled me, that's all," I stammered. He walked over to the sink, right where I had just hidden the bottle. He reached for a glass. "Just grabbing a glass of water," he said casually. Panic, primal and absolute, seized me. "No!" The word flew out of my mouth, louder than I intended. He paused, his hand on the cabinet, a flicker of something, annoyance, suspicion, crossing his face. "No?" I had to think fast. I just made a fresh pitcher of iced tea. Your favorite." I improvised, rushing to the refrigerator. "It's much better than plain water. Let me pour you a glass." I practically shoved the glass of tea into his hand, desperate to get him away from the sink, away from the evidence of my betrayal or his. He shrugged, appeased by the offer of his favorite drink. He took a long drink, his eyes never leaving my face. "You're acting weird today, Mom," he said. Just tired," I said, my smile feeling like a painful crack in a porcelain mask. After he left, I sank into a kitchen chair, my body shaking uncontrollably. The close call had solidified everything. This was no longer a suspicion, it was a hunt. He had no idea that the bottle of what looked like simple water, hidden under my sink, was now Exhibit A in the case against him. And I was about to drive 2 hours to find a jury who could tell me every single one of its secrets. He thought his unannounced visit was a gesture of love. He had no idea it was the final confirmation I needed. The loving son was a mask, and I was about to pay a lab to show me the monster hiding underneath.
The 2-hour drive to the city was a strange, surreal bubble of time. The world outside my car windows was aggressively normal. Trucks thundering down the highway, families in minivans heading to some sunny destination, billboards advertising cheerful fast food restaurants. Inside my 10-year-old sedan, the air was thick with a silence that felt heavy enough to suffocate. I was a 63-year-old widow on a secret mission to find out if her only son was a monster. There's no greeting card for that occasion. With every mile that passed, I felt myself splitting into 2 different women. One was the grieving, slightly frail Helen everyone knew. The other was a stranger, a cold, methodical woman who clutched a glass bottle wrapped in a dish towel on the passenger seat as if it were a bomb. The lab was in a nondescript industrial park, a place of beige buildings and anonymous corporate logos. It was perfect. The air inside smelled of antiseptic and ozone. A young woman with bored eyes behind thick glasses took my bottle without comment. I filled out the form with a fake name and a P.O. box I'd rented a month ago for my Christmas card list, a detail that now seemed grimly ironic. I paid in cash, a significant chunk of my emergency savings, and she handed me a receipt with a case number on it. "The results of the full spectrum analysis will be ready in 48 hours, she said, her voice monotone. "You can log in to our secure portal with this case number to view the report." 48 hours. 2 days. I drove home in a daze, the world seeming both sharper and more muffled than before. The 2 days that followed were the longest of my entire life. My quiet little house, once my sanctuary, transformed into a prison of suspicion. Every creak of the floorboards was an intruder. Every shadow in the corner of my eye was a threat. I drank only bottled water, the plastic crinkling in my hand with a sound that felt like a gunshot in the silence. I looked at the food in my own refrigerator with a paranoid eye. The container of homemade soup Mark had brought over last week suddenly looked sinister. Had he touched other things? The sugar? The coffee? The salt? The poison of suspicion was far more fast-acting than whatever might be in the water. It had already contaminated everything. That night, David came to me again. The dream was different this time. There was no terror, no screaming. We were young, sitting on the porch swing of our very first apartment. He didn't speak a word. He just reached out, took my hand in his, and gave it a gentle, firm squeeze. His touch was warm, solid, and real. It was a dream of reassurance, a silent message across the void. You are strong enough for this. You are not alone. I woke up with the phantom feeling of his hand in mine, and for the first time in days, my heart didn't feel like a frantic bird. It felt steady. Mark's daily check-in call came like clockwork. This time, I was ready for it. My performance as the loving, slightly dotty mother was seamless. I told him I was feeling fine, just a bit tired. "You should take a nap, Mom," he said, his voice dripping with that familiar, cloying concern. "And make sure you're drinking lots of that good, clean water. It'll give you energy." "I will, sweetie," I said, my eyes fixed on the stack of plastic water bottles on my counter. "By the way," I added, my voice casual, "my lawyer called. We need to update some of the estate paperwork. He was asking for your current address and social security number for the beneficiary forms. Can you text them to me?" There was a tiny pause on the other end, a beat of silence that was almost imperceptible, but I heard it. It was the sound of greed. "Oh, yeah, sure, Mom. I'll send them right over," he said, his voice a little too eager. He thought I was getting my affairs in order for his benefit. He had no idea I was just confirming the identity of a suspect. The morning of the second day, my laptop sat on the kitchen table like a judge waiting to deliver a verdict. My hands trembled as I typed in the lab's web address and entered my case number. The page loaded. A link appeared. "Download PDF report." I clicked it. The file downloaded, and a multi-page document filled my screen. A sea of chemical names, data points, and technical jargon. I scrolled past the lists of common minerals and additives, my eyes scanning for anything marked as an anomaly. And then I saw it. A separate section at the end, flagged in red. Unidentified alkaloid compound. Next to it, in parentheses, were the words that made the world stop. Consistent with compounds found in colchicum autumnal. I didn't know what that meant. I opened a new tab and typed the name into the search bar. The first result popped up. It was a Wikipedia page for a delicate purple flower with a pretty name, the autumn crocus. And right below the name, the first line of the description. A toxic plant, lethal if ingested, historically used as a slow-acting and difficult-to-detect poison. My breath left my body in a single silent gasp. My hand flew to my mouth, but no sound came out. It was real. The dream, the test strip, the sickness, the concern, it was all real. He was really doing it. My son, my beautiful boy, was slowly, patiently, lovingly trying to murder me.
We are on the verge of the climax. What happens now will turn everything upside down. You simply cannot miss the resolution of this story. For a long time, I just sat there, the light from the laptop screen painting my face in a cold, digital glow. The world had shrunk to the size of that single PDF document, to that one horrifying line of text, a slow-acting and difficult-to-detect poison. The air in my lungs turned to glass. The grief I felt for my husband was a familiar ache, a dull, constant companion. This new feeling, was something else entirely. It was a hollow, echoing abyss. It was the grief for a son who was still alive. There was no rage. The capacity for that kind of heat had been scoured out of me. What remained was a strange, chilling clarity. I knew what I had to do. The police were an option, of course, a logical, sensible option. But sending my only son to prison felt like a sterile, incomplete ending. It was justice, perhaps, but it wasn't a reckoning. He needed to face not a judge or a jury, but the ghost of the little boy he used to be. I picked up the phone. My voice when I called him was unnervingly calm. "Mark," I said. "My lawyer just called. The estate paperwork is all finalized. All the documents making you the sole beneficiary are ready. He just needs your signature on the final transfer forms. Can you come over this evening?" The bait was laid. I heard that familiar, telltale pause on his end, the sound of his greed kicking in, sharp and fast. "Yeah, of course, Mom," he said, his voice bright with anticipation. "I can be there around 7. That's great news." He arrived at 7 on the dot, holding a bouquet of my favorite lilies. A gift for the mother he was actively trying to kill, to celebrate her signing away her worldly possessions to him. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. He looked happy, relaxed, eager. He thought he was at the finish line. "The papers are on the coffee table," I said, my voice soft. I gestured toward the living room. He walked in, a victorious smile on his face, and then he stopped dead. On the polished wood of the coffee table, there were no legal documents. There were only 2 things: the printed, multi-page lab report from the city, and beside it, a thick, leather-bound photo album, its cover worn with age. His eyes darted from the lab report to my face, his smile faltering as confusion, then panic, began to dawn. "Mom, what's this? Where are the papers?" I didn't answer his question. I sat down on the sofa and patted the seat next to me. After a moment's hesitation, he sat, his body rigid. I ignored the lab report for a moment and pulled the heavy photo album onto my lap. I opened it to the first page, a faded photograph of a tiny baby with a shock of blonde hair wrapped in a blue blanket. Me, 20 years younger, looking down at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration. "Do you remember this?" I asked quietly, my finger tracing the edge of the photo. "You were so small. The doctor said you were a fighter." I turned the page. A photo of a little boy, maybe 5 years old, with a gap-toothed grin, proudly holding up a crayon drawing of a lopsided rocket ship. "You wanted to be an astronaut. You drew this for me. I kept it on the refrigerator for 10 years. I kept turning the pages, my voice a soft, steady monologue of memory. "Here you are, the day you fell off your bike and scratched your knee. You cried for an hour and I held you on this very sofa until you fell asleep. This was your 10th birthday. You begged for a dog and your father and I surprised you with Buster. I've never seen you so happy. This was the day you graduated high school. David was so proud he cried." With each photo, with each memory of a love that was pure and unconditional, I could see something happening to him. His confident facade began to crack. His jaw trembled, his eyes, which had been filled with cold calculation, now filled with a hot, shameful wetness. Finally, I closed the album. I picked up the lab report and slid it across the table toward him. "I had the water tested, Mark," I said, my voice still a whisper. "The filter you gave me. It was a very thoughtful gift." He stared at the paper, at the chemical names, at the single damning line highlighted in red. He didn't try to deny it. He didn't try to gaslight me. There was no fight left in him. The memories had disarmed him. A great, shuddering sob escaped his lips, a sound torn from the deepest part of his soul. He slid off the sofa and fell to his knees on the rug, his head bowed, his body shaking with violent, racking sobs. I'm sorry, he wept, the words muffled and broken. Mom, I'm so sorry. I don't know. I don't know why. The money. He couldn't finish. He just knelt there, a grown man brought to his knees not by an accusation, but by the undeniable, unbearable weight of a mother's love. I looked down at the man weeping at my feet. Then I looked at the photo album on the table, filled with the face of the boy he once was. The boy in the pictures was my son. The man on the floor was a stranger. I stood up, leaving him there on the floor, surrounded by the ghosts of his own childhood. I didn't call the police. The justice system could take his freedom, but it couldn't give him a soul. Only the memory of love could show him he'd lost his, and that was a life sentence no judge could ever hand down.